Thank you. Michael Parenti is one of the greatest writers that this country has ever produced. As a historian, he is a preeminent interpreter of our times. And like the greatest historians, he is able to illuminate our present moment with a very, very fine, careful weaving in of the past, the present, and moving with tremendous momentum toward the future. He has an undeniable sense of reality, and he speaks with tremendous authority of feeling. With nearly 24 books, what he has offered our world is absolutely beautiful and extraordinary. We are very, very proud at Before Columbus to honor Michael Parenti with the American Book Award for Lifetime Achievement.
He could have kept going on. I would. That was such a beautiful introduction. Now comes the massive anticlimax here. Okay, so I did prepare a few words here. I got them here. As you could, well, I'm enduring a sciatica attack right now. So if I start climbing up on this thing, it's not because of all that passion and all this thing, but and it's a wonderful thing to get this award, and I really appreciate it. I had interesting reactions from people, emails coming in saying it's about time, or you're more deserving of this, and all that stuff, and. I've actually gotten a number of awards along the way, but I think, but it's picked up lately, and I think what happened, it got out that I'm 81 years old, so everyone's saying, "Oh, 81? That's hard to believe, 81." And I'm reminded of Studs Terkel's. Remember when he was being interviewed on the radio one time? He was 94. I mean, he was getting ready to check out. He was, and he said, there's 3 stages, Studs Terkel. He worked out of Chicago, but he was a New York boy, I want you to know. He said, there's 3 stages in a man's life: youth, middle age, and you're looking great, So that's me. I'm looking great. Yeah. Oh, 78? You think 78? Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, in my life, I ran into a lot of problems when I was writing. A lot of years where I've been kicked out of some of the best universities in America because of my politics and my political activism. And when I meet people now and they ask me what I do, I say I'm a recovering academic, and that's what I do. What I did in my writing and my speaking is I often crossed forbidden lines. I went all the way with my political analysis, often to appreciative readers and listeners, but also to mainstream notables who would take umbrage at what I would say, and even many who claim to be left of the mainstream. It's surprising how mainstream they really are. Speaking of mainstream notables, when I was coming here, I remembered, and it fit in, it's no accident, I guess, that it came up in my mind, an interview I heard with Daniel Boorstin. Remember Daniel Boorstin? American historian, Mr. Super Patriot. Any issue that came along, the Supreme Court, the Constitutional Convention, Daniel Boorstin would come out and say, "Isn't it the greatest in the world? Aren't we just wonderful to be Americans? Oh, isn't this just wonderful? Everything's so great, I heard him on the radio, and this is talk about apropos. I heard him on the radio, and I remember the interview. He was talking about Columbus and the work that Columbus. I hope the foundation appreciates my timeliness. He's talking about Columbus and the remarkable work that Columbus did and how he opened up a whole civilization, saved Western civilization and gave it a new dimension and did this. And Columbus, you know. So somebody at the end in the Q&A, somebody said, "Oh, you know, Columbus, he was a plunderer and a slaver. You know, he put people in slavery." And Borston answered with such peevishness in his voice. He says, "Well, I want to remind you that Christopher Columbus did not have the NAACP or the Civil Liberties Union, Civil Rights Union to elevate him, you know." And I'm saying, what a response! I mean, what a response! The truth is, Columbus was a slaver and a plunderer, among other things, and that should be mentioned while you're waving the flag and beating the drums here. The truth is, there was an NAACP and a civil rights critiques then that could have elevated him. His name was Bartolomé Las Casas, right? He was a Spanish Dominican, I think, wasn't he? A Dominican who wrote those incredible. I mean, you read the stuff and it's so powerful and moving about the murder and the slaughter and the wretched horrors that these explorers were doing every time they came into the New World. It's as old as any other world on the planet. Into the New World, and they always denounced the massacres and such. Now, slavery, you know, that brings up the whole issue of slavery. We were taught slavery was a way of life. A peculiar institution, they call it. What cute little names, a peculiar institution. Don't judge it by modern standards. That's supposed to be, see, what Borston was flashing at this question was what historians called the sin of presentism, that you're imposing your present values and such on this time 3 centuries away. Well, I'd like to say that these values there are values that transcend time and place. I wrote a book called The Culture Struggle, which really deals with that. It's not about the culture wars in America. It's the culture. It's about how to think about culture, because culture is a field of struggle. It's constant struggle and constant flux in what we see as culture, and it's not presented that way in the anthropological and sociology books. It's always, there's these mores, these languages, this, that boundary, that, and these groups, and they have these values, and that's that. That's not the way it operates at all the time. Culture can. It's true that culture permeates every aspect of life and every value in the social system, but it's not the sum total of life. It's not the sum total. You can have independent. We have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That's signed by 125, 130 different countries, all of which have different histories, different cultures, different notions about what's going on, different languages, and yet they all understand that there are things in that declaration that has to do with what? With women having rights and protections, with all people having a fair share of on the value that's produced by labor and such. So, I mean, how else do you think you can read Dante, or Aristophanes, or Goethe, or Shakespeare even? We read people from different cultures, different centuries, different worlds, different languages even, and we understand them. There are some things we're going to miss a little bit of that. That's why you've got the scholars to put those little footnotes at the bottom of them. That keeps them busy, makes them feel worthwhile. But meanwhile, we understand. We understand with our hearts what is going on. We understand with insights and powers that transcend culture. So when I hear about slavery, saying it was a way of life, I talk past my notes, and then I can't find where, because I've gone over there somewhere. My notes are down here. Don't, when somebody says don't judge it by modern standards, you know what I say about slavery? I say, oh yes, judge it by the highest and most current standards you can muster up, because it stinks, it's rotten. In every slave society, and incidentally, in every slave society I studied, from ancient Rome, which I wrote a book about, I wrote a book about Julius Caesar, but I had a whole chapter on slavery there. In every slave society, I came across a group of people who was in that society. No one's ever reported this, but I have seen a group of people in every one of those societies who denounced slavery, who opposed it, who understood its injustices and its horrors, and who hated it. They were called slaves. And they never got their word in very well. You know, there weren't many interviews, or not too many of them were interviewed or anything. Well, so that's what I would tell Daniel Boorstin, how shallow and how facile his position was and response was to that questioner. I've tried to teach that we should relate, this is another thing, more general statement, that we should relate immediate social experiences to larger social structures and to larger social relations. I might begin to sound a little too social science-y here, I know. If things are always as they appear, if appearance was the sum total of reality, we would need no investigation and no analysis and no social science. Furthermore, much of politics is the rational use of irrational symbols. Much of politics is filled with deception and hypocrisy. When you hear good ideas and good questions raised and they're dismissed as conspiracy theory, or what do you have, a conspiracy theory? You know that you should always remember that conspiracy theory is not always a theory. There are real conspiracies. There's secretive planning. There's constant deception. People will come up to me and say, "So you think there are people? So you think there's a group of people who get together in a room and they plot these things?" I say, "Oh no, not in a room. No, they go skydiving and they hold their hands and they say, 'What are we going to do about this and that? Are we going to do that?'" Or they meet on carousels. You ever see them and they plan that way? Or they meet Bilderberg Conference, Bohemian Grove in California, the Knickerbocker Club in New York. They're always meeting. The Council for Foreign Relations. We know who they are. They have think tanks all over. They produce these things. Lewis Powell, that famous memo he wrote a while back, which he sent to the chair of the Education Committee of the Chamber of Commerce. He said, this is what we got to do to roll back the social democracy that's been developing in America and get us back to a free market capitalism. They know what they're talking about. They know what they're defending. They own it. When you look at these people and you say they're innocent, they don't really know, don't they get things mixed up sometimes? Don't they make mistakes? Yeah, they do sometimes. They do. Everybody does. But they are pretty much, you don't call them stupid and foolish. You don't call the people who own the world stupid and foolish. They're doing something right. In my book, The Face of Imperialism, I made that point, and criticizing Chalmers Johnson, where he loves to talk, he's dead now, but he used to talk about how foolish U.S. foreign policy is, how we get ourselves in quagmires. That's a favorite word. How we get all mixed up and how we become overweening and overdone. No, it's not overweening. They know what they're doing. U.S. foreign policy, the empire is not falling apart. It's doing very well. They're opening more bases than they've ever had. They're destroying and killing more people. Any leader, any movement, any country that shows any kind of independence, that tries to use the land, the labor, the capital, and the natural resources of a society Any leader who does that will be targeted, and he will be demonized. And he's demonized to the American people, a Noriega, a Milosevic, a Putin, whatever. They will demonize him and tell the people, this guy is an enemy of us. He's opposed to us. Watch out for that. And once the people are convinced that this leader is a threat, and then they will go along with they feel our country has license to go bomb his people or attack it or invade it. So I would urge readers to give critical perception. I'll stop right here. Give critical perception not only to what we think, but to how we think. We should, as best we can, be inventively critical and not let conventionality keep us skidding along the surfaces. Besides, there's something I wanted to say about surfaces and about I can't find it. What are you going to do? It was about this. It was about that you can never judge these things by surfaces. I was thinking of fascism, Italian fascism and German Nazism. You can't judge them by there was something else there that doesn't often get grabbed. You see it as Sieg Heil, goose-stepping, brutalizing religious minorities, military aggression, and that was fascism, and we had to beat it, and wasn't that a good war? What I try to show is that, in fact, there's a whole other thing. Fascism was a very rational system. It's the essence of politics, the rational use of irrational symbols. The symbols are irrational. The torches, the drums, the goose-stepping, the swastika, the incantations, and all that. All of that is a using of irrational symbols, but for rational reasons. You know what the Nazis did in Germany? Do you know what the fascists did in Italy? I'll tell you what they did. They cut wages by 50%. Nobody ever tells you that. You can read 100 books on who supported Hitler, but you never read anything about who Hitler supported after he got in and paid off. They abolished corporation taxes for big corporations. They gave huge subsidies to the corporations. They abolished and wiped out the human services that the Weimar Republic had been putting in. Wiped them out. They got rid of protections for work and that sort of stuff. So that's what fascism is. It has a rational component to it, which has to do with class interest. Okay, I'm going to stop there because once I get into these subjects, I get carried away a little. I know, but we should, as best we can, be inventively critical and not let conventionality keep us, as I say, skidding along surfaces. I already said that, didn't I? Critical challenge is the first great step toward democratic victory. Critical challenge is the first great step toward democratic victory. What's the second step? Oh, you'll have to wait until my next book comes out in March. Okay. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's a beautiful award.
Well, that sciatica must have really kicked in because that was some passion there. Thank you. May you live a long and prolific life and keep writing those books because the world needs you, Michael Parenti, and what you have to say. Speaking truth to power.